Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to begin in the 17th verse of the 4th chapter in the book of Ephesians. We did a previous lessons entitled Ephesians 1:16, a call for unity. So much of the first half of the 4th chapter, it's 32 verses, so that's literally a midpoint in it, is positive oriented. They explain the figures of unity, which are one body, one spirit, one hope, one master, one faith, one baptism, one Elohim and Father. And so these are the bonds of unity which tie the collective church together, and that's listed in verses 3 through 5. And then he eventually describes the offices of the church, the respective roles which it requires in order for one to function fully. And this involves everyone exercising their spiritual gift to the appropriate extent that one is endowed with such giftedness, and not only that, but making sure they're tied in the right direction. So not everyone has the same gifts or is fit for the same office, so it's really a matter of the Spirit to figure out where each one goes and does what they need to do. And in the final three verses, the 14th and 15th, he says we have to avoid immaturity. We have to eschew the immature habits to which we are accustomed to, not now that we belong to something greater than ourselves. And then he acknowledges the Messiah's total ownership over the church in the final verse. So that being said, we're going to open with the 17th verse, which reads, "So this I say, and witness in the Master, that you should no longer walk as the Gentiles walk, in the vanity of their mind." So his primary audience would have been Gentile converts of the faith, so they would have been familiar with the way that Gentiles walked, and they would have a new lease on life that he was hoping they could judge to be morally superior and spiritually superior to the one in the cultures they had lived in. The Gentiles, objectively speaking, were spiritually degenerate compared to the ancient Jews, ancient Israelites. "Having been darkened in the understanding, having been estranged from the life of Elohim, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the hardness of their heart." So the darkness blinds their vision from laying hold of the claims of the one they are estranged from, and because they are estranged from him, they are estranged from the life, the eternal life he offers. And the reason for this is their own ignorance, and it's stimulated and supplemented by a hardness of heart. So the heart and mind must be engaged together in order to get the most out of life. "Who, having become callous, have given themselves up to indecency, to work all cleanliness with greediness." So the state of the Gentiles is at the bottom of the abyss, basically, and that might be an unfair exaggeration, but that seems to be the implication I'm interpreting at this moment in time. "But you have not so learned Messiah." So with this new life they had been taught and have lived and have acted out and believed, they should know better than to behave like the cultures from whence they hailed. The church offered the Gentile converts a superior life, and it gave the Jews the surer route to salvation. Now, granted, many Jews are saved. Indeed, Moses and Elijah are already partakers of the resurrection even before the Savior was raised. So we shouldn't exclude any group that doesn't agree with us 100% from the exalted standing or assumption of attaining salvation. "If indeed you have heard him and were taught by him, as truth is in Yahshua." Yahshua is the full embodiment and the fullest expression of truth, as declared in John 14:6, and that is something no other religion's founder ever claimed. The Buddha died claiming to still be searching for truth, and I think Muhammad and Confucius said something slightly similar, but in his own lifetime, the Messiah claimed to be the way, the truth, and the life, and by the truth, that means he is, there's no lie in him, and he is strength, and he is wise and omniscient. But that you put off, with regard to your former behavior, the old man being corrupted, according to the desires of deceit. So deceits, the path that desires lead to, or your carnal desires at least, are a deceitful one. They promise you the moon, and you basically end up in hell if you follow it to its maximum limit. And that with the new life comes new clothing. We have taken off the grave clothings of the former life in which we walked, in which we were walking in sin and death, for the grace clothes, having been spared of that consequence through faith in service, action, ministry. And to be renewed in the spirit of your mind. Now, the mind must be reinvigorated and rejuvenated by the Spirit. These are best working in tandem and not in isolation. Mutual tandem, not mutual isolation, because they are both two key ingredients of the elements which comprise our nature. Therefore, having put off the false, speak truth, each one with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. Now, the responsibilities of belonging to a community is to tend to the common welfare, and that includes every individual you reach out to in your path. And no community can flourish in the absence of honesty. Now, the world is not an honest place. There's full of deceit and evil and untrustworthy people, but the church ought to give the citizen of the world citizenship in heaven while they maintain their dual citizenship. Be wroth, but do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your rage. That's more familiar translated as wrath, but the word is virtually identical. But there's no sense in we have to at least cleanse our heart before we get to sleep. Otherwise, we will get no sleep if we do not tend to the hatred that is brewing in our heart. There's no reason that it should interfere with our sleep. So, wrath means he's acknowledging that it is possible to be angry, and we can be angry at sin, and that is a righteous anger, and do not sin. So anger is sinful or contaminated whenever one is prone to sin, and they best expunge it before they lay their head on the pillow. Nor give place to the devil. So the devil flourishes in hatred because he is the author of hatred and jealousy and deceit and lying and murdering and trickery and everything else that is evil. So he does abide in our wrath, in our anger, in our hatred, and in our rage. And that is his home and his territory, and we have no one to blame but ourselves for opening the door and inviting him in. But little do we think that anger is such an instinctive reaction in most cases. One is not inclined to calculate that they are going to the dark side and succumbing to Satan slowly but surely. Let him who stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, so that he has to share with those in needs. So the goal of the church is to take thieves and turn them into workers, those who work and earn an honest living for their livelihood. And working with your hands what is good, there is nothing wrong with that. Paul himself was not a professional minister, although he preached as professionally as anyone else in human history, but he did perform the duties of a tent maker, and that was his trade and his income. So and a lot of monastic sects have imposed work on priests and ministers, but Paul did acknowledge that salaried ministry was permissible because we enrich others spiritually, and it's only right that they enrich us materially, but that's another discussion entirely. Let no corrupt word come out of your mouth, but only such as good for the use of building up, so as to impart what is pleasant to the hearers. Now, in some translations, it is, I actually forget, but corruption entails a negative connotation, so it is profanity and vulgar speech and abusive words. That's one of the ones I remember. Don't let it come from our mouth, and the outburst of our mouth, the expressions thereof, are a reflection of the state of our heart. So from angry hearts spring insults and all sorts of unjust language. But the goal of the church is edification, and none of this can be edified if people keep doing it. If these Gentiles keep returning to the ways they came from, none of this unity that was labored so hard, it was every waking hour was devoted to maintaining that, could last if they did all these things and returned to their ways. But rather to speak pleasant and uplifting. So I guess the cliche to be observed is if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. And that's something I might actually need to work on myself, come to think of it. But do not grieve the Ruach Kadesh of Elohim, by whom you were sealed for the day of redemption. So the Ruach Kadesh, or the Spirit, is commonly thought of as an it. That is wrong. It is a he, or he is a he. He is a person and enters into, he experiences the full range of emotions, and sin grieves him because he is the one prompting us to regeneration, and it is, that's another topic entirely, but he also seals us in some sense for our salvation, or just extends the license of ownership through something along those lines. And redemption is the work which begins when he converts us. So even though conversion cannot come in the absence of a prompting from the Spirit, the Spirit's work is far from finished once he converts us. So this is a lifetime and a 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year gig that he calls us to sign up for. Sadly, the majority of us put in part-time, what is really to our own benefit and welfare, to invest full-time in everyone else's. Let all bitterness and wrath and displeasure and uproar and slander be put away from you, along with all evil. So these are things which are spiritual pollutants. Bitterness, no one can make us bitter, but we can make ourselves bitter. And the way we do that is by taking things personally, stewing up resentments, just letting it all boil to the tip of the top of the pot inside us. And that leads to wrath, which is anger and injury infliction and displeasure. No one likes doing it. They do it because their lives suck, basically. But so there's no pleasure in bullying or being wrathful towards others. And uproar, that just means riotous and loud and eccentric. And slander, there's no clause for slander in the church. It disrupts the entire unity and perverts the integrity of not only the slanderer, but the slandered. And evil, all of the above are quite clearly evil, and both in themselves and connected to every other evil. And all evil finds its source and origin in the adversary. And be kind towards one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as Yahweh also forgave you in Messiah. So from the negative, he closes with the positive. Be kind. There's nothing wrong that can come from being kind towards one another. Kindness is contagious, and when you are kind to someone else, they are more inclined not only to be kind back to you, but to spread the spirit of what you extended them to others. And tender-hearted, nothing wrong can go with that. That means we're concerned not only for ourselves but for others. So we are not selfish creatures, but serving creatures. And forgiving one another. Now, forgiveness is of salvific extent is far too precious a commodity to give to the unforgiven. And we are called to forgive as we have been forgiven. And how did we become forgiven? How is it even possible for us to be forgiven? And the answer is through the Son who literally died for us so that we can live for an eternity with him and with the Father and with the Spirit in heaven. And he did that on the cross, and the agony was excruciating, but he did it all for us, and we really owe it to him and to those who call himself or bear his name to foster unity in our local congregations and if as far as possible on the global level too. But that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'll see you soon. Tune in next time. Bye-bye.